The night was thick with tension as a storm raged outside, thunder crashing in the distance, but inside the sleek, modern high-rise, the air was still and heavy. Isabelle stared at the glossy, black invitation that had appeared on her doorstep earlier that day. The sleek paper seemed to pulse in her hands as if it were alive. It had no return address, only an address to a private address in the city, a place she'd never heard of. Too hot to handle, she muttered to herself. The words printed in bold, fiery red letters had an unsettling ring to them. Who would send her an invitation like this, and why now? She barely recognized her own handwriting, yet there was something familiar about it. The thrill of curiosity gnawed at her insides, mixed with a deep, unexplainable fear. She had always been the type to seek answers, but this felt different. Isabelle, don't be foolish, she whispered, trying to steel herself. But despite the warning, she could not ignore the pull, the sense that whatever this was, it held the answers to a question she hadn't even known to ask. She stood up and moved to the window of her apartment, gazing out at the rain-lashed streets below. The world outside was blurry through the street glass, but the city felt alive with secrets she was about to uncover. She caught her reflection in the window, a stark, tired image of herself. She was 32 now, far older than the ambitious, naive woman she had once been. But the years hadn't dulled her instincts. If anything, they had sharpened. Too hot to handle, she muttered again, the words swirling in her mind like smoke. The invitation wasn't an accident, it was meant for her, and that realization sent a chill creeping down her spine. There was no going back now. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her coat. The address printed on the invitation was only a few blocks away, a sleek, private club hidden in the shadows of the city's downtown. She had never heard of it before, but that didn't stop the urge to go. In fact, it only pushed her forward. Whoever sent this wanted something. She just wasn't sure if it was something she was ready to give. When she arrived at the building, the streets were nearly deserted, save for a few distant figures walking under the glow of streetlights. The towering glass structure in front of her seemed to shimmer with dark allure, the logo on the door an unfamiliar emblem, just a single red eye. The bouncer at the door looked her over with cold, indifferent eyes. Without saying a word, he stepped aside, allowing her to pass. The interior was nothing like she expected. The walls were sleek and metallic, the floors polished to a mirror-like shine. The lighting was dim, casting shadows in every corner. A faint hum of music drifted through the air, a pulsating beat that seemed to vibrate her very core. The atmosphere was electric, charged with an undeniable sense of secrecy. Isabelle couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline as she took in the space. People lingered at the bar, their conversations hushed, their eyes flicking toward her. There was an intensity to them, as if they knew something she didn't. She didn't know why she felt so exposed in that moment, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She didn't belong here, not in a place like this. "You're here," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Isabelle turned to see a woman standing behind her, dressed in a sleek, black leather jacket. Her pale blue eyes glinted with something that made Isabelle's heart race. The woman was stunning, but there was an edge to her, something dangerous that Isabelle couldn't quite place. "You didn't think we would just let you in, did you?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. It was calculated, almost predatory. Isabelle opened her mouth, but no words came. The woman's eyes bore into hers, making her feel like she was being stripped bare. "Come with me," the woman said, and before Isabelle could protest, she was already turning on her heel and walking away. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, but then followed, curiosity outweighing any lingering doubts. They walked through a series of corridors, each one darker and more ominous than the last. The further they went, the more disoriented Isabelle became. She hadn't realized how large the building was or how labyrinthine it seemed. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall, guarded by two men who stepped aside when they saw the woman. The room beyond was dimly lit, a large circular table at its center. A dozen or so people were seated around it, their faces shrouded in shadows. Isabelle's heart began to race again as she realized this was no ordinary gathering. This was something much more secretive, dangerous, and powerful. The woman gestured for Isabelle to sit at the only empty seat at the table. The chair was cold against her skin, and the silence in the room was suffocating. Everyone's eyes were on her now, and it felt like the weight of their gazes pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "You're here because you're different," the woman said, breaking the silence. "And we need people like you." Isabelle could feel her pulse quicken as the words sank in. "People like me?" she asked, her voice unsteady. The woman nodded. "Yes. You have something inside you, something that makes you unique. And now, you're in a position to either run from it or embrace it. But know this, whatever happens here, there's no turning back." Isabelle stared at the woman, fear and curiosity swirling inside her. This was no ordinary invitation. It was a test, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. But it was already too late to back out. "Let's begin," the woman said, and the room fell into a tense, heavy silence. The game was about to start. The room was colder than Isabelle expected, a chilling air that made her skin prickle with unease. The dozen or so figures around the table seemed to blend into the shadows, their faces obscured by darkness. Yet, she felt their eyes on her, every single one of them. The weight of their gaze was suffocating, and she could sense an unspoken pressure in the air. No one spoke. The silence was unsettling, thick with anticipation. The woman who had led her here, the one in the black leather jacket, stood across from her at the table, her eyes never leaving Isabelle's face. There was a gleam in her pale blue eyes, a cold, calculating glint that made Isabelle's stomach turn. The air around them seemed to crackle with a strange energy. It was as if the woman already knew Isabelle's every thought, every secret. The silence stretched out, and for a moment, Isabelle felt like she might suffocate. The tension was unbearable, but then the woman spoke. "You must be wondering why you're here," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "It's because you have something that none of them do." Isabelle swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what the woman meant, but her instinct screamed that this was not going to end well. Still, she remained silent, unsure of how to respond. There was something magnetic about the woman, something that kept Isabelle rooted to the spot, despite every fibre of her being telling her to run. "You have ambition," the woman continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "A drive that goes beyond ordinary desires. You crave something more. Power. Influence. Control." Isabelle's breath caught in her throat. How could this woman know that? She hadn't even told anyone about her ambitions, let alone her deepest, darkest desires. The idea of power, of standing above the rest, of being someone others feared and revered, had always lingered in the back of her mind. But she had never spoken it out loud. The very thought made her heart race. "Tell me I'm wrong," the woman said, her voice a challenge now. "Tell me you've never fantasized about rising to the top, about becoming untouchable." Isabelle opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped in the woman's gaze, her thoughts tangled in confusion and uncertainty. How could she possibly explain the ambition that had been gnawing at her for years? The longing to break free from the monotony of her life, to transcend the ordinary, and claim a place among the exceptional. But it wasn't just ambition that drew her here. It was the mystery. The allure of the unknown, the thrill of being part of something bigger than herself. Something dangerous. The woman smiled knowingly, her lips curling into a smirk. "I can see it in your eyes. You're hungry for more. And that's exactly why you're here." Isabelle's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if it was fear or excitement that surged through her veins. She was beginning to realize that she was caught in something far bigger than herself. Something she couldn't easily escape. The woman motioned for her to stand. "Come with me. It's time you meet the others." Isabelle stood, her legs shaky beneath her as the woman turned and began walking toward the back of the room. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. She followed, her mind racing with questions, with a need for answers. What was this place? What was she about to be drawn into? They passed through a narrow corridor, the walls lined with cold, metallic surfaces that reflected their steps. The flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows, making the space feel even more claustrophobic. Isabelle's pulse quickened as they approached a large, heavy door. The woman didn't knock. She simply pressed her palm against a panel beside the door, and it slid open silently. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but there was enough light to reveal the figures seated around a long, oval table. This wasn't like the previous room. There were no shadows here, just faces, cold and expressionless, staring at her as she entered. "You are the newest member," the woman said, her voice carrying an unsettling authority. "But I assure you, you won't be the last." Isabelle swallowed, stepping further into the room. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The people at the table were dressed in suits, dark, tailored, and sharp. They looked like businessmen, powerful, untouchable. But there was something more about them. Something dangerous, lurking beneath their polished exteriors. Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a precipice, and that if she took one wrong step, she would fall into an abyss she couldn't escape. "You've all heard of Isabelle," the woman said, gesturing to the table. "She's been chosen. She's different." The people around the table exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Isabelle felt their eyes on her, weighing her, assessing her. It was unnerving. A man sitting at the far end of the table leaned forward, his gaze sharp and calculating. "She's brave, I'll give her that. Most people would have run by now." Isabelle swallowed, her throat dry. "Why am I here?" she finally managed to ask, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound composed. The woman smiled again, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile of someone who knew something you didn't. A smile of someone who held all the cards. "You're here because you have something they don't," she repeated, her voice soft, yet carrying a weight that made Isabelle's stomach churn. "You have the potential to take everything you've ever wanted. And more." Isabelle's mind raced. What were they offering her? Power? Influence? Control? It sounded too good to be true. And yet, something inside her stirred, a desire to reach out and claim it. This was her chance. Her chance to rise above the ordinary, to stand out. But was it worth the price? "What's the catch?" Isabelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's smile widened, but it wasn't kind. "There's always a catch," she said, her voice taking on a dark, warning edge. "Nothing worth having comes without a price." The words echoed in Isabelle's mind, but before she could process them, the door behind her slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. Her heart raced as she heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel the presence of the others, their eyes fixed on her, waiting. Now the woman's voice came again, low and dangerous. "You'll find out what you're truly made of." The darkness was suffocating, a blanket that seemed to swallow everything around Isabelle. Her pulse pounded in her ears, each beat feeling louder than the last. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own breath, shallow and quick. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, though she couldn't see them. The weight of their scrutiny pressed down on her chest like a vice. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the thick silence. No one answered. No one moved. For a long moment, the world seemed to stop, as though the entire room had frozen, waiting for something to happen. The air was charged with a strange energy, electric, almost. It was as if they were all part of some grand experiment, and Isabelle was the subject. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, their harsh glow almost blinding in contrast to the darkness. Isabelle squinted, her eyes adjusting to the sudden change. The people around the table were still there, staring at her, their faces unreadable. The woman in the black leather jacket stood in front of her, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Are you ready?" the woman asked, her voice smooth and almost coaxing, as though this were a simple conversation, and not a life-altering moment. Isabelle swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart. "Ready for what?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. The woman's smile widened. "For the truth," she said, her tone almost teasing, as if she knew something Isabelle didn't. "For the game. For your future." Isabelle's stomach churned. She felt as though the ground beneath her was slipping away, leaving her hanging in midair. The words felt like a warning, though she couldn't quite grasp what she was being warned about. There was something sinister about the woman's smile, something that sent a shiver down Isabelle's spine. "You're not here by accident, Isabelle," the woman continued. "You've been chosen because you have something special. Something that can make you unstoppable. But there's a test. Everyone who wants to be part of this world has to pass it." The tension in the room was palpable. Isabelle could feel the eyes of the others on her, their gazes sharp, assessing. They were waiting for her to make a decision. The woman's words hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding her thoughts. What did she have to do to pass this test? What would she have to sacrifice? "I don't understand," Isabelle said, her voice cracking. "What is this test? What do you want from me?" The woman took a step closer, her eyes locking onto Isabelle's. "You're already in too deep, Isabelle. It's too late to back out now." Isabelle's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what she had walked into, but every instinct told her she was in over her head. She wanted to leave, to walk out of that room and never look back, but something held her in place. Fear, curiosity, or something else entirely. "There's no turning back," the woman repeated, her voice almost comforting. "But you have a choice. You can embrace what's waiting for you: power, control, influence, or you can walk away. But know this, walking away won't be easy." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Isabelle felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. What did she have to lose? She had been stuck in a life that felt hollow, working a job she didn't care about, surrounded by people who didn't see her. This, whatever this was, offered her a chance to break free, to escape the mundane, and step into a world where she could have it all. But at what cost? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, a voice from across the room interrupted her. "You can't just walk away, Isabelle," the man at the far end of the table said, his voice low and smooth, like melted honey. "We've all made our choices. Now, it's your turn." Isabelle's eyes flicked to the man. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his face obscured by shadows, but his voice carried an undeniable authority. There was something unsettling about him, something dangerous. He wasn't just a businessman. He was something more, something that made her gut tighten with unease. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, though it was more a showing of teeth than anything else. "This isn't a decision you make lightly. It's not just about what you want, Isabelle. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. You'll have to give up something to gain everything." Isabelle felt a knot form in her stomach. "What kind of sacrifice?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman in the black leather jacket spoke again, her tone cutting through the tension like a knife. "You'll find out soon enough. You're not the first to be faced with this decision, and you won't be the last. The test isn't just about your ambition, Isabelle. It's about your willingness to do whatever it takes." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known, deep down, that there would be a price to pay, but hearing it so plainly, so coldly, made the reality of it all sink in. This wasn't a game. This was real. The woman turned to the others at the table. "Show her." Without another word, one of the men at the table pressed a button on a remote, and a screen flickered to life on the far wall. The image on the screen made Isabelle freeze in place. It was a video, shot in grainy black and white, of a boy no older than 25, tied to a chair. His face was bruised, his mouth gagged, his eyes wide with fear. The camera zoomed in on his face, and Isabelle could see the terror in his eyes. Isabelle began, her voice choking in her throat. The woman nodded slowly. He didn't pass the test. The video continued, showing the man struggling, his movements frantic, but the more he struggled, the more the camera zoomed in on his eyes. The fear in them was unmistakable. He was begging for his life. "Don't look away, Isabelle," the woman said, her voice sharp and commanding. "This is what happens when you hesitate. When you can't make a choice." Isabelle's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. The image of the man's face, his eyes filled with desperation, burned into her mind. She had a choice to make. But could she handle the truth? Could she do what it took to step into a world like this? The woman's voice echoed in her mind. "You'll find out what you're truly made of." The video on the screen flickered for a moment before cutting off, the darkness returning as if it had never been disturbed. Isabelle's breath was shaky, her chest rising and falling erratically. The cold sweat on her skin felt like ice, and her limbs were stiff, frozen by the horror she had just witnessed. The room seemed to close in around her, and for a moment she couldn't remember how to breathe. The woman in the leather jacket stood still, watching her closely, as though studying her every reaction. The silence that followed the video was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for Isabelle to make the next move. Her heart was pounding in her ears. The images of the boy's terrified eyes burned into her mind. She could still see them, could still hear the muffled sounds of his desperate cries. The room seemed to spin around her, and she had to close her eyes for a moment to steady herself. "Is this what you want?" the woman asked, her voice low but firm. "A life where hesitation means death?" Isabelle opened her eyes, meeting the woman's gaze. There was no mercy in those eyes, only cold calculation. She knew the answer, knew that her hesitation would lead her nowhere but down a dark, irreversible path. The question lingered in the air, thick with meaning. Could she do it? Could she step into this world, where power and control came at a steep price? The fear gnawing at her inside screamed for her to run, to turn away from this nightmare, but the part of her that was drawn to ambition, the part that wanted something more than the monotony of her life, whispered in her ear to stay. The woman took a slow step forward, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You don't have much time," she said. "We've all made our choices, Isabelle. Now it's your turn. Do you have what it takes?" Isabelle's mind raced, torn between fear and something else. The same fear that kept her awake at night, longing for something greater than herself, for a life that was unpredictable, raw, full of possibility. This world offered everything she had ever wanted. But it also promised the darkest consequences for those who failed. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the path she would choose to walk, and the price she'd have to pay for it. "Yes," Isabelle whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was enough. Enough for the woman to hear, and enough for the others in the room to understand. A slow smile spread across the woman's face, as if she had been waiting for that answer all along. She gestured to the man who had first spoken, the one with the danger smile, and he rose from his seat, his eyes never leaving Isabelle. "You've made the right choice," the woman said, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper. "But remember, Isabelle, once you enter, there's no going back. There's no safety net. There's only power or ruin." The man walked toward her, his movements deliberate, as if every step was measured. Isabelle didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. His presence was unnerving, his aura one of quiet menace. He extended his hand to her, and for a moment, Isabelle just stared at it, unsure of what to do. But then she realized there was no turning back. No more questions, no more hesitation. She had chosen this path. There was no escape. She took his hand, feeling the coldness of his skin against hers, and a strange shiver ran through her. The man smiled again, but this time, there was no warmth in it. Only calculation, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Welcome to the game," he said, his voice smooth and final. Before Isabelle could respond, he released her hand and stepped aside, motioning towards the door. The woman in the leather jacket nodded toward it, signaling for Isabelle to move. "Your journey begins now," the woman said, her tone final. "The next step is yours to take. But know this, everyone who enters this world has their price." "What are you willing to lose, Isabelle?" Isabelle didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already walking towards the door, her feet moving of their own accord. She wasn't sure what to expect beyond it, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the same person who had walked into this room just hours ago. The woman had been right. She had made her choice. The door opened, and she stepped through, into a dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was heavy with the sense of finality, as though every step she took was leading her deeper into a world she couldn't escape. She walked in silence, her mind still reeling from the decision she had made. She didn't know what awaited her, what kind of tests or challenges lay ahead, but she knew that she had crossed a line, one she could never uncross. As she reached the end of the hallway, another door loomed in front of her, this one larger and more imposing than the rest. It had no handle, no way to open it. Only a strange symbol carved into its surface, a symbol she didn't recognize, but felt oddly familiar. Isabelle reached out and touched it, her fingers brushing against the cool wood. A chill ran through her, and she pulled her hand back quickly, feeling a sudden surge of unease. But it was too late to turn back now. Without thinking, she stepped forward, and to her surprise, the door opened on its own, revealing a vast room beyond. The lights flickered on, revealing rows of desks and monitors, people moving around in a quiet, efficient manner. The hum of technology filled the air, and Isabelle realized she was standing in a control center of some sort. But this wasn't any ordinary control center. She could feel the power radiating from every corner of the room. The people here weren't just employees, they were operators, controllers, puppeteers. They had the power to shape the world around them. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man dressed in black, his face obscured by a mask. He walked toward her, his movements precise and deliberate. There was something unnerving about him, something that made Isabelle's skin crawl. "You've arrived," he said, his voice low and calm. "Welcome to the real game." Isabelle's heart raced as she looked around the room, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just walked into. She had wanted power. She had wanted control. But now that she was here, she realized that she didn't truly understand what she had signed up for. The man in black raised a hand, pointing to the monitors. "Everything you see here, everything you've been offered, comes with a price. But it's not the price you think." Isabelle frowned, trying to make sense of his words. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The real question, Isabelle, is how far you're willing to go. How much you're willing to sacrifice to gain everything you've ever dreamed of. Power, control, influence. All of it can be yours. But not without cost." Isabelle felt a chill run down her spine as the weight of his words hit her. She was in this now, and there was no turning back. Her journey had only just begun.